what was contained in one of the ransom notes that came in to the media. Remember, there's just been tons of these notes, right? But two of them early on were ransom notes that the Guthrie family and the FBI were taking very seriously. The first note was the first communication at all, but it came in almost 2 days after Nancy vanished, right? She vanished on February 1, and a ransom note didn't come in until the following Monday, February 2 at almost 7 o'clock at night. So she's gone in the middle of the night from Saturday to Sunday, and Monday night this ransom note comes in, and it comes into the media, 2 TV stations in Arizona and TMZ. And so that was odd, right? Then 4 days later, another ransom note came in. And this is the subject of the reporting tonight. And this is important because there had been lots of rumors and rumblings early in this case. I heard them myself. I did not report them because they were rumors and rumblings, right? Now they are being reported, bona fide reported, okay? And the rumors and rumblings are effectively that Nancy Guthrie died after she was abducted, and that the abductors apologized for this accidental death.
We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
For 4.5 months, the most important detail in the Nancy Guthrie case sat quietly inside newsrooms across the country. Journalists knew, sources had talked, the rumblings had been circulating since the earliest weeks of the investigation. And yet, for reasons that come down to the standard of verification that separates responsible reporting from speculation, almost none of it made it to air. Then, on a single day, more than 142 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home, the dam broke. Howard Bloom, an investigative journalist writing for Airmail, published a detailed account drawing on sources close to the investigation. ABC News followed, independently confirming the core details and adding specifics of their own. News Nation, which had been covering this case more consistently than almost any other national outlet through reporter Brian Enton, added another layer of source detail on top of that. 3 separate outlets, 3 separate sets of sources, all reporting the same essential revelation on the same day. Ashley Banfield, who has been covering this case on her show Drop Dead Serious, was among the journalists who had heard the same information months earlier and had not reported it. Not because she doubted it, but because a rumor from inside a tightly sealed investigation is not the same as a confirmed, sourced, attributable report. That standard held for over 4 months. What changed on this particular day was not the information itself. What changed was that enough independent sources had now spoken to enough separate outlets that the story could no longer be held back responsibly. And what those sources confirmed is this. The second ransom note in the Nancy Guthrie case did not ask for money in exchange for her safe return. It told whoever received it that Nancy Guthrie was already dead, that her death had not been intentional, and that there was still a price being asked, not for a living person, but for something else entirely. To understand why this matters as much as it does, the timeline needs to be clear. Nancy Guthrie was last seen on the night of January 31, 2026, when her son-in-law dropped her home after a family dinner. She went inside. That was the last confirmed sighting. She was reported missing the following morning, February 1st, after she failed to appear for a virtual church service with a friend. The first ransom note did not arrive until the evening of February 2nd, nearly 2 full days after she vanished. It was sent through the online news tip submission system at Cold, the CBS affiliate in Tucson, and also reached a second Tucson television station and TMZ around the same time. 4 days after that, on February 6th, a second note arrived. This one went only to Cold. No other outlet received it. Cold's news director, Jessica Bobila, received that second note at approximately 11:45 in the morning. Her first call was not to her on-air team. It was to investigators. She forwarded the note before a single word of it was reported publicly, and she waited until the sheriff's office and the FBI jointly authorized her to confirm its existence. When she later sat down with News Nation anchor Elizabeth Vargas for an interview, she was careful. She confirmed no proof of life had been provided. She declined to describe the note's contents in detail. She said only that it was something the FBI needed to look into without interference. At the time, that interview raised questions. In light of what is now being reported, it answers them. The investigation itself has been running on two tracks since the beginning. The public-facing track with press conferences, reward announcements, and tip-line appeals, and the sealed track, which is where the real work has been happening and where almost nothing leaks. As of 142 days in, a joint task force made up of FBI agents and Pima County homicide detectives continues to operate out of the FBI building in Tucson. Ashley Banfield confirmed through her own sources today that the task force remains completely sequestered. There is no back and forth between these detectives and the broader Pima County homicide unit. Even colleagues inside the same department describe it as a vault. The people working this case are not talking, which makes what broke today all the more significant. What you are about to hear has been kept out of public reporting for over 4 months. This channel exists to put it all together in one place. Subscribe to Cold Case News Nation right now so you never miss a development in a case like this one. The first note arrived at 6:42 in the evening on February 2nd. That timestamp matters. Nancy had been missing since the early hours of February 1st, which means nearly 48 hours passed before whoever took her made any contact at all. The note did not come through a direct email to the Guthrie family. It did not go straight to the FBI. It was submitted through Cold's publicly accessible online news tip form, the same system the station uses for viewers to send in story leads. Around the same time, a version of the note also reached a second Tucson television station and TMZ. The language in the first note described Nancy as safe but scared. It demanded cryptocurrency in exchange for her return, and it closed with 2 words that left no room for negotiation, or else. On the surface, that could be dismissed as the kind of language anyone following the case on television might construct. But buried inside the note were 2 details that stopped investigators from doing that. The first was a reference to what Nancy was wearing at the time of her abduction. The second was a specific mention of a damaged floodlight in the backyard of her home. The floodlight detail, while notable, was harder to protect as exclusive information. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, news cameras and investigators had been all around the exterior of the property. Images circulating publicly showed enough of the home's surroundings that someone paying close attention could have noted a broken light fixture. But the clothing detail was different. Tommaso, Nancy's son-in-law, dropped her home at 9:48 p.m. on the night of January 31st. He watched her go inside. She was dressed in the clothes she had worn to dinner. What she changed into before going to bed that night was known to one person, Nancy herself. No family member saw her after she went through that door. No neighbor reported a conversation. There is no public record of what she was wearing when she was taken, and yet the note described it. That single detail is what gave the FBI and Pima County investigators their strongest reason to treat the first note as potentially credible, rather than the work of someone following the story from their couch. The Apple Watch was also referenced in early reporting as a detail the note writers knew, but that one does not hold up to the same scrutiny. Nancy had been photographed publicly wearing an Apple Watch on multiple occasions. Within the first 48 hours of her disappearance, enough images of her and her home had circulated that anyone could have made that assumption. Investigators were careful not to treat the Apple Watch reference with the same weight as the clothing detail. Both notes were submitted through Cold's tip form, which asks for a name, an email address, and a date of birth. None of that information is verified by the system. You can type anything into those fields. The 2 notes use different names, different email addresses, and different birth dates. Jessica Banfield confirmed in her interview with News Nation's Elizabeth Vargas that when her team examined the back-end data from both submissions, the IP address on the second note was not the same as the first. However, when investigators began tracing both addresses, they appeared to route back through similar cloaking software. That finding went directly to the FBI and became part of the active digital analysis of the communications. Jessica Bobila also raised a point about the digital nature of both notes that added another layer of uncertainty. Unlike a handwritten ransom note where forensic linguists can analyze pen pressure, letter formation, and handwriting consistency, a digitally submitted message strips away most of those markers. She noted that with typed digital communications, it becomes genuinely difficult to determine whether the language was produced by the same person across both notes, or whether AI assistants may have been used to shape the writing. That question has not been publicly resolved. The second note arrived on February 6th, exclusively at Cold. No other outlet received it. Not TMZ. Not the second Tucson station that had received the first note. Only Cold. Jessica Bobila received it at approximately 11:45 that morning and immediately contacted investigators before any reporting was done. When she later sat with Elizabeth Vargas on News Nation, she confirmed the note provided no proof of life. She confirmed the FBI took immediate possession of it, and she said clearly that what it contained was something investigators needed to examine without any outside interference. She did not describe its contents. She did not need to. The way she chose her words around what she would not say communicated nearly as much as the note itself. What the note actually contained is now being reported by 3 separate outlets drawing from independent sources. ABC News states the note told recipients that Nancy had died shortly after she was taken and that she was buried in nature. News Nation's sourcing adds that the death was described within the note as unintentional and that the specific phrase used was buried with nature. Howard Blum of Airmail goes furthest in his description, characterizing the opening of the note as a sputtering and labored apology for Nancy's inadvertent death, followed by what he describes as a transactional section offering to deliver her body for a sum of money. Whether that sum would match the original $4 million demand or represent a different figure was apparently never made clear within the note itself. Harvey Levin of TMZ has been precise about what his outlet did and did not receive. TMZ got the first note. They never received the second one sent exclusively to Cold. The communications TMZ received stated Nancy was alive and contained no apology. Harvey confirmed in a direct conversation with Ashley Banfield that he takes the ABC reporting on the second note at face value, and that the timeline of what his own mystery source was sending TMZ appears to align with the possibility that Nancy died in the days immediately following her abduction. That alignment becomes clearer when you look at what Savannah Guthrie posted on Instagram on February 7th. One day after the second note arrived at Cold, she appeared on camera alongside her brother Cameron and her sister Annie. The family held hands, and Savannah said that they had received a message, that they understood it, and that they wanted their mother returned so they could celebrate with her. That phrase, celebrate with her, struck many viewers as unusual at the time. Harvey Levin said he interpreted it as Savannah signaling she may have already understood that celebrating with her mother might no longer mean what it once did. One thing that can be separated cleanly from all of this is the arrest of Derek Colella. On February 5th, a 42-year-old man from California was taken into federal custody after sending 2 text messages to members of the Guthrie family on February 4th, asking whether the Bitcoin payment had been sent and indicating he was waiting on the transaction. Colella told investigators he had pulled the family's contact information from an online source after following the case on television. He was charged with transmitting a ransom demand in interstate commerce and using a telecommunications device to harass. Investigators confirmed his actions had no connection whatsoever to the notes sent to Cold or to any credible communication in the case. The details in these notes are the closest thing this investigation has to a direct communication from whoever took Nancy Guthrie. We are breaking all of it down here, and we are not done yet. If you are not subscribed to Cold Case News Nation, now is the time to fix that. Before going further into what Howard Blum is reporting about the task force's working theory, one thing needs to be said clearly. Blum is an experienced journalist with a long career and a serious resume, but he is not without error. During the coverage of the Idaho quadruple murders involving Brian Kohberger, Blum reported that identification cards belonging to the 4 victims had been found in Kohberger's car in what he described as a love box. That turned out to be significantly wrong. What investigators actually found were old personal IDs stored in a box alongside gloves inside Kohberger's home. An entirely ordinary thing that most people have in a closet somewhere. The way Blum framed it implied something deeply incriminating that the facts did not support. That error matters here because some of what Blum is now reporting about the Guthrie case is corroborated by ABC News and News Nation, and some of it is not. The details that overlap with independent reporting carry real weight. The details that remain exclusive to Blum carry a caveat. With that established, here is what Blum's sources are telling him about where the investigation stands 142 days in. The Joint Task Force of FBI agents and Pima County homicide detectives has processed over 40,000 tips since Nancy's disappearance. That is not a small number. Running down 40,000 leads takes an enormous amount of time and manpower, and yet according to Blum's sourcing, the task force keeps returning to the Ransom notes as its primary focal point. The word he uses is telling. He says they return to the notes by default, not because the notes are the strongest lead, but because everything else has stalled. 40,000 tips, and the most productive thing investigators have to work with remains a pair of digitally submitted messages sent through a television station's public tip form. That is a significant statement about where this investigation is after nearly 5 months. The language analysis of those notes has produced what sources describe as a working profile of the person or persons responsible. The assessment coming from inside the investigation is that whoever wrote the notes is educated, articulate, and has a functional understanding of how cryptocurrency works. The apology contained in the second note, the part that describes an inadvertent death and expresses what one source called a sputtering and labored remorse, is being read by investigators as the behavior of someone who did not plan for things to go the way they did, not a hardened criminal who operates without conscience. Someone who had a plan, watched it fall apart, and then did something that professional kidnappers almost never do. They said sorry. Ashley Banfield pushes back on the educated profile in a way that deserves attention. The assumption that this person is particularly intelligent or sophisticated is being driven largely by the fact that they have not been caught. But she raises a different explanation for that. The neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie lived in the Catalina foothills was not well covered by surveillance infrastructure on the night of the abduction. Tucson did not have the kind of license plate reader network that many other cities have in place. The surrounding streets had minimal doorbell camera coverage outside of Nancy's own property. The conditions that night did not work against whoever did this. They worked in their favor. Evading detection under those circumstances may say more about luck and geography than it does about criminal sophistication. A person can stumble into a situation that works out for them without having engineered it that way. The team effort theory adds another dimension. Blum reports that the task force has developed a belief, based on the note analysis, that this was not a solo operation. The working theory is that at least 2 people were involved, one who handled the physical side of the abduction, and one who supplied the planning, the knowledge of the target, and likely the communication strategy. This is presented as a theory derived from the notes themselves, not from physical evidence or witness testimony. It has not been confirmed as fact. The prevailing belief about the nature of the operation is equally important. This was not a cartel. It was not an organized international kidnapping syndicate. The FBI entertained that possibility early on, as they would in any case with this profile. But the language of the notes, the way the communications were routed through local Tucson media, and the behavior of whoever sent them all point towards someone with local knowledge and a local connection. Harvey Levin has held this view from the beginning. His read is that whoever did this either knew Nancy personally or knew enough about her connection to Savannah Guthrie to identify her as a target. They were watching local news. They knew the Tucson market. They reached out to Tucson stations because that is the world they operated in. Ashley Banfield developed her own theory through exclusive reporting she conducted early in the case. 2 details she uncovered and reported before most other outlets were following this closely form the foundation of it. The first is that Nancy Guthrie frequently left her back doors unlocked. The second is that on the night of her disappearance, both the back kitchen entrance to her home and the backyard gate were propped open with flower pots. Those 2 details together suggest that whoever entered that home may have had prior knowledge of those entry points, not from surveillance conducted that night, from having been on the property before. Banfield's theory is that a contractor or day laborer who had done work in Nancy's backyard at some earlier point may have noted those access points, noted that an elderly woman lived there alone, and returned later with a plan. If the worker came through a contractor who used day labor, there may not even be a formal record of that person's name or employment. That would explain why 40,000 tips have not produced a viable suspect. And then there is the question that Ashley Banfield raises about the earliest days of the investigation. Sources inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department told her directly, in the first days after Nancy vanished, that investigators had identified a number 1 suspect. That suspect was Tommaso Cioni, Nancy's son-in-law, the man who dropped her home on the night she disappeared. This was not Banfield's conclusion. It was what sources inside the department told her was the active focus of the investigation. Chione and all other members of the Guthrie family have since been officially cleared. But the question she keeps returning to is, what happened during the days when investigators were pointed entirely in that direction? Were other leads left unworked during those critical early hours? Was the window to track movement, trace a vehicle, or identify an unfamiliar face in the neighborhood allowed to close while the department's attention was somewhere else? She cannot say for certain, but she believes it will become one of the most examined decisions when this case is eventually reviewed in full. This case has layers that most coverage has never touched. Cold Case News Nation goes deeper than the headlines every single time. Subscribe and share this video so more people can follow every development as it happens. From the very first days of this investigation, TMZ occupied an unusual position. They were not just covering the story, they were part of it. When the first ransom note arrived, it did not only go to the Tucson television stations, it went to Harvey Levin and his team at TMZ as well. And the FBI's response to that was immediate. Agents came directly to TMZ's offices. They went through the organization's servers, they sat with TMZ's staff and worked through every piece of data attached to that communication. Harvey Levin became, from that point forward, not just a media figure reporting on the case, but an active participant in the investigative process, maintaining a direct line to an FBI liaison who kept in contact with him throughout the months that followed. But the ransom note was not the only communication TMZ received. Shortly after the first note arrived, a separate individual made contact with Harvey. This person was not claiming to be the kidnapper. What they claimed was something different and in some ways more unsettling. They said they knew who the kidnappers were. They said they knew where Nancy Guthrie was being held. They said she was in Mexico, and they said that time was of the essence, and that they wanted to be compensated for the information that could lead investigators to her. Harvey took it seriously. The FBI took it seriously. But before any arrangement could be made, the same person contacted TMZ again from the same address. The message this time said that time was no longer of the essence. That single shift in language, from urgency to the absence of it, is something Harvey now believes lines up directly with the timeline of the second ransom note sent to Cold on February 6th, the note that said Nancy had died. If the person contacting TMZ genuinely had a connection to whoever took Nancy, then his pivot away from urgency may have reflected knowledge that the situation had already changed in a way that could not be undone. The source kept reaching out to TMZ after that, not with new information, not with proof, just contact. Periodic messages from the same person, the same address, never delivering what he had originally promised. Harvey proposed a straightforward solution. The Guthrie family had publicly offered a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Harvey told the source to simply claim it. Provide the information, do it anonymously, and collect the reward. The source refused. He said he was afraid that the people he was describing might come after him if they found out he had talked. Afraid that law enforcement might find a way to implicate him in the crime itself, simply by virtue of his proximity to the people involved. He said the money he wanted was not just payment for information. It was funding to go underground, to disappear before retribution could find him. Harvey adjusted the offer. He told the source that TMZ would act as a buffer. They would collect the reward on the source's behalf, pass it along, and keep his identity completely protected throughout the process. The source went quiet. He did not take the offer. He did not provide the information, but he also did not disappear entirely, continuing to make contact without ever crossing the line into actual disclosure. The FBI's investment in identifying this source was significant. At one point, 5 FBI agents were working simultaneously alongside TMZ's own IT team in an attempt to trace the source's digital footprint. They could not find him. Harvey finds that detail striking in a way that is hard to dismiss. The same investigative apparatus that could not trace the kidnappers through the first ransom note, despite the note being submitted through a platform that generated IP data, also could not trace a secondary source who had been making repeated contact over an extended period. 2 separate, untraceable individuals connected to the same case. Whether that reflects the sophistication of cloaking technology available to ordinary people today, or something more deliberate, is a question that does not have a clean answer. The FBI also attempted something more direct in the early stages of the financial side of the investigation. They placed $260 into a Bitcoin account, connected to the ransom demand. The intent was to generate a transaction that could be traced to whoever was monitoring or controlling that account. The attempt produced nothing. The account either went unmonitored or whoever was watching it recognized the move and did not touch it. Approximately 1 month before Ashley Banfield sat down with Harvey for her interview, Harvey picked up the phone and called his FBI liaison with a proposal. TMZ would pay the mystery source. Not a fortune. Enough to satisfy what the source had been asking for. They would film the process as a documentary, follow where the money went, follow where the information led, and see what developed. Harvey was direct with the liaison about one condition. He would not move forward with any part of this plan without explicit FBI approval. He did not want to compromise the investigation. He did not want to step on an active operation. He wanted to do it with the FBI's knowledge and ideally with their support. The liaison's response was that it was interesting. He said they would look at it. He said they would get back to Harvey. That was the last conversation they had. Since that call, Harvey has attempted to reach the same liaison 6 separate times. The FBI has not returned a single one of those calls. Harvey is careful about how he describes this because he has spent months building a working relationship with this particular contact. But he is clear that this kind of silence is not normal. This liaison had always called back. Through all the months of the investigation, through every development and dead end, the contact had been consistent. And then, after one specific proposal involving a potentially connected source and a plan that could generate new traction in a stalled case, the line went dead. Ashley Banfield says she finds it distressing. She cannot say publicly what she thinks it means. But the fact that a responsive and cooperative FBI contact went completely silent immediately after a specific proposal is not something she is willing to set aside. The cross-border dimension of this case has been part of Harvey's thinking from early on. He has consistently believed that Nancy may have been taken into Mexico. The FBI shared information with him early in the investigation, indicating that surveillance cameras in the area around Nancy's home showed no suspicious activity on the night of the abduction itself. Their interpretation of that data was that if Nancy was transported across the border, it did not happen immediately. The kidnappers likely waited. They held their position, stayed out of sight, and only moved when they felt confident they would not be picked up on camera or stopped at a crossing. If that theory is correct, it also explains the 48-hour gap before the first note arrived. They did not make contact until they were where they intended to be. That theory took on new dimensions when Buscando Corazones Nogales entered the picture. This is a women's search organization based in Nogales, Mexico, that specializes in locating missing persons on the Mexican side of the border. They received an anonymous tip claiming that Nancy Guthrie was buried at a specific location near the United States and Mexico border. The organization took the tip seriously enough to partner with state authorities in Sonora and conduct a formal search of the location. What they found was significant in its own right, though not in the way anyone connected to the Guthrie case had hoped. The search uncovered 25 unmarked graves. None of them were connected to Nancy Guthrie. The tip remains anonymous and unverified, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed it had not been contacted by Mexican authorities in connection with the search. Harvey addressed the question of why whoever did this chose to communicate through media outlets rather than going directly to the Guthrie family. He noted that this approach is not without historical precedent. The Zodiac Killer sent his messages to the San Francisco Chronicle. The Unabomber routed his manifesto through newspapers. Using media as a transmission channel is unusual but not unprecedented. What makes the Guthrie case different is the combination of that approach with a financial demand. Professional kidnapping operations do not work this way. Established criminal networks with experience in ransom scenarios go directly to the family, establish secure communication, and control the flow of information tightly. Sending a ransom demand to a television station's public tip form and copying TMZ is not how that business operates. Which is another data point supporting the theory that whoever did this was not a professional. How does Harvey think this case eventually gets solved? An FBI contact told him months ago that the most realistic path to a resolution is not a forensic breakthrough. It is not a digital trace or a DNA match arriving from Quantico. It is human behavior. Someone who knows something going somewhere, saying something to the wrong person, and that information eventually finding its way to law enforcement through a chain of connections that nobody planned. The contact told Harvey it could take 6 months. It could take 2 years. But that is where he thinks it ends. Ashley Banfield has a more specific prediction. She has worked enough cases over enough years to have watched a pattern repeat itself. In at least half a dozen cases she can point to by name, the break came from a woman, a girlfriend, a partner, someone who was close to the person responsible, and who eventually reached a point where staying quiet cost more than speaking up. A relationship that ended badly, an argument that went too far, a moment where loyalty ran out. She has seen it happen before, and she believes it is the most likely way this case cracks open when it finally does. As of June 2026, the task force investigating the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie remains intact and operational. Approximately 6 Pima County homicide detectives are confirmed still working the case. The FBI agent count has not been publicly disclosed, but what has been confirmed through sourcing is that the entire task force continues to work out of the FBI building in Tucson. There is no movement between that unit and the broader homicide division. Colleagues inside the same department describe the task force as completely walled off. People who work in the same building, who have known these detectives for years, say they cannot get a word out of them. That level of operational security at 142 days in is either a sign of an investigation protecting something significant or a unit that has very little left to protect and is simply holding its position. Over 40,000 tips have been processed since Nancy vanished. That number represents thousands of hours of follow-up calls, cross-references, database checks, and dead ends. And yet not one of those tips has produced a publicly confirmed breakthrough. No arrest, no named suspect, no location. Ashley Banfield returns to the detail that the task force is gravitating back toward the ransom notes by default, and sits with what that actually means. It means the tip pool, for all its volume, has not delivered anything strong enough to chase. 40,000 leads, and the most useful material investigators have is still a pair of digitally submitted messages from an anonymous sender routed through cloaking software. That is a difficult place to be at nearly 5 months. The question of how the early days of the investigation were handled has not gone away, and Ashley Banfield does not let it. She reported early on, through sources inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, that investigators in the first critical days were focused almost entirely on one person as their primary suspect. That person was Tommaso, Nancy's son-in-law, the man who had dropped her home on the night she disappeared. Banfield is precise about this. That was not her theory. That was what sources inside the department told her was the active investigative focus at the time. Every member of the Guthrie family, including Shioni, has since been officially cleared. But the window that existed in those first 24 to 48 hours, the window that every experienced investigator describes as the most critical period in any abduction case, was a window in which a significant portion of investigative energy was directed at a man who turned out to have no involvement. Whether leads that could have been developed during that window were left unworked is something Banfield believes will become one of the central questions when this investigation is eventually reviewed from the outside. She cannot say with certainty that tunnel vision caused the case to stall. But she raises the question because the facts support raising it, and because the sources who were inside that department in those early days told her directly what the focus was. The cold case label has been applied to this investigation in various forms of media coverage and public conversation, and Banfield addresses it directly. Technically, this is not a cold case. A case becomes cold when every active lead has been exhausted, when there is nothing left to call, no one left to interview, no database entry left to run, and the file goes up on a shelf to wait for something external to bring it back to life. That has not happened here. DNA samples are still being analyzed at the FBI laboratory in Quantico. Tips are still being worked through. The task force is still showing up every day inside that FBI building. But she acknowledges that from the outside, from the perspective of a family waiting for answers and a public that has been following the case since February, the pace and the silence make it feel that way. Feeling cold and being cold are two different things, but the distance between them is narrowing. Howard Blum's reporting has driven much of what broke publicly on the day this episode covers. His account is the most detailed and the most specific of the 3 outlets that reported simultaneously. But it also carries the caveat that has to be applied whenever his name is attached to a major story. Some of what Blum reported about the Guthrie case aligns directly with what ABC News and News Nation confirmed through their own independent sourcing. Those overlapping details carry genuine credibility. The details that remain exclusive to Blum, the characterization of the apology as sputtering and labored, the specific framing of the team effort theory, the granular description of how the task force is navigating its investigative dead ends, are reported here with that distinction clearly in place. Corroborated detail and exclusive detail are not the same thing, and in a case this serious, that line matters. What remains unresolved in this investigation is not a short list. The identity of the masked man seen on Nancy's doorbell camera has not been publicly established. The full contents of the second ransom note have not been officially confirmed or released. The mystery source who made repeated contact with TMZ, claiming knowledge of the kidnappers and Nancy's location in Mexico, has never been identified despite 5 FBI agents and TMZ's own IT team working simultaneously to trace him. The DNA analysis at Quantico covering mixed samples including a hair recovered from the scene is still pending. The question of whether Nancy was transported across the border into Mexico remains a theory supported by circumstantial logic but unconfirmed by physical evidence. And the question of whether the early investigative focus on the brother-in-law closed doors that have never been reopened remains exactly that, a question. The reward stands at $1.1 million. $1 million from the Guthrie family and $100,000 from the FBI. That combined figure is available for any information that leads to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. If you have information, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. Both remain active. And for anyone who has information but is too afraid to contact law enforcement directly, Ashley Banfield has made her own email available throughout this investigation. The address is dropdeadseriousInfo@gmail.com. She has done this before. She has received tips, passed them to investigators, and protected the identity of the person who sent them. That offer stands. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show desk on April 6, 2026. She has continued to speak publicly about her mother's case in the months since. Her message to whoever is responsible has not changed. It is never too late to do the right thing. Someone out there knows something. That statement is not rhetorical. In a case built around communications from an anonymous sender, a mystery source who kept making contact without fully committing, and a suspect who has managed to stay invisible for nearly 5 months, the most likely path forward runs through a human being reaching a point where silence becomes more costly than speaking. An FBI source told Harvey Levin that this is exactly how he expects the case to break. Not through a lab result, not through a digital trace, through someone talking, a conversation that goes further than it should, a confession made to the wrong person in the wrong moment. Ashley Banfield has watched that happen enough times in her career to believe it is not just possible, but probable. She has seen it specifically with partners and former partners of suspects, people who stayed quiet through loyalty or fear and eventually reached a breaking point. Half a dozen cases she can recall where that is exactly what happened, where the thing that cracked everything open was not evidence. It was a relationship ending badly and someone deciding that what they knew was no longer something they could carry alone. The most significant development to emerge on this day, 142 days into the investigation, is not a forensic result or an arrest. It is the public confirmation through 3 separate outlets drawing from independent sources that the second ransom note received by Cold on February 6th told whoever read it that Nancy Guthrie was gone. That information existed inside newsrooms for months. Journalists knew. Sources had spoken. The professional standard of verification kept it from going to air. And now it is part of the public record. What it means for the family, what it means for the investigation, and what investigators are prepared to say about it publicly. Those questions do not have answers yet, but the information itself is out. And in a case that has been defined by what is not being said, that is not a small thing. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. This investigation is still open, and every time something moves in this case, Cold Case News Nation will be here to cover it. If this video gave you something that no other source has put together in one place, subscribe right now and share it with someone who follows cases like this one. The more people watching, the more people who might recognize something, remember something, or know someone who does. Drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from and what you think happened. We read every single one. And if you know anything at all, anything, 1-800-CALL-FBI. Do not wait.